Welcome to our monthly Cyber GRC conversation. I am Richie Perry, and in today's conversation, myself and other InfoSec experts, namely we have Chris Carter and Paul Robinson, um, expert in the industry who bring many years of experience, who are able to provide various insights into various topics that has to do with cybersecurity and the various domains of cybersecurity. And we'll definitely be providing our insights on the subject of challenges associated with achieving cybersecurity maturity within our organizations. And I believe that all companies and businesses, regardless of the sector that you're in, wants to be at that highest level of maturity in light of the dynamics of today's cyber activities. All organizations want to be at that level whereby they can um, say that they are pretty much resilient to cyber attacks. But we know that that is not the case. And in lies the various challenges that will affect our organization in terms of the capabilities that exist to really get organizations at that level. So we'll definitely be exploring, looking at the challenges and more so those strategies and approaches that we can take to help organizations to get to that point that they can, to some extent, be comfortable in terms of their operation, being able to recover if there should be an incident of whichever nature. But first of all, I mean, as I always like to do, is to remove any assumptions. As we all know that there are always cybersecurity folks who are tuned in, and I never take things for granted. So I just want to give some insights or clarity in terms of when we talk about cybersecurity maturity. And as it relates to cybersecurity maturity, then I want you to consider this uh, um, as an organization's overall preparedness to defend itself and its valuable digital assets from cyber attacks. And that's in the simplest way. And it's like a measure of your organization's cyber resilience. And you're often hearing about resilience as it relates to cybersecurity. And as it relates to a breakdown of the concept, just in a nutshell, I mean, this has far more depth to it that we can actually explore. So you have a higher level of maturity, and this indicates a stronger defense against digital threats. And this means the organization can effectively mitigate risk, minimize damage from attacks, and maintain normal operations even in the face of cyber challenges. And then you also have a lower maturity. That represents a weaker defense, making the organizations more susceptible to cyber attacks and their consequences. And there are also various levels of maturity that we'll be looking at when we talk about cybersecurity maturity models that can be adapted um, within organization that they seek to work towards, and even as it relates to meeting various compliance standards, then organizations seek to gain these various levels of maturity. So, guys, what's your take on this overall topic of challenges associated, or just even just talking about cybersecurity maturity? I mean, do you believe that all businesses and organizations truly understand the concept of cybersecurity maturity to start with in the first place?
I think a lot of companies lack the simplicity of the word maturity, and I think Richey, you set the table here very nicely as to what this rule really means. When you think of the word maturity, um, you know, it's up for debate, but I'm a little bit more mature than I was at 8 years old. It's still the same me, I still have the same tendencies and whatnot, but there's maturity that's gone along the way to help me function in the world, in society, as a husband, as a father, and things like that. And I think that's a key word that we have to focus in on when we talk about CMMC, and we talk about the things surrounding it, is that this is just an exercise to make us more mature. It doesn't guarantee that we're not going to experience a cyber attack. it doesn't guarantee that everybody is going to buy into the program. We're just maturing our program to make it more resilient and more responsive when it comes to the matters of cybersecurity. So, that's my opening retort here. I think you did a great job of laying the foundation for that and getting people to understand this is not a recipe to make sure that you never get attacked or that you're never going to experience any problems in cybersecurity. It's just a way to mature your business to make sure that you're doing the best job that you can to build a sustainable program.
No, absolutely. I agree with what you said, Paul. And yeah, absolutely, Richie. I think you did a good job in terms of laying out the case for having a mature program. But to even go back to the analogy that Paul used about when he was 8 versus where he is today, maturity. It's also relative, right? When you were 8 years old, Paul, if you're nearly as old as I am, you didn't have access to a cell phone. You didn't have access to a lot of the technologies that we have
Mm,
today, and therefore that has an impact on how we would rate your level of maturity. If you see an 8-year old or a 10-year old today who cannot use, for example, a cell phone or does not know how to log on to the internet, then you would probably question the level of maturity of that individual. So,
mm,
one of the challenges that I've seen in terms of maturity is that very concept, right? The changing landscape. And as far as cyber is concerned, there's always the evolving threat landscape. Uh, Times change, hackers or bad actors' capabilities develop, business needs change, um, and companies, they're either going to acquire or divest parts of their company. So there are a lot of things, and then you have the layer 8 issues internally. How mature are the non-cyber folks, your cyber ambassadors? You talk about security education and awareness training. You also have budgets to worry about, right? There's a lot, right? Then you have technical debt that you have to worry about. So there are a lot of things that I'm hoping that we will be able to talk about today. Kind of pull the curtain back, the proverbial curtain back, so to speak, to see what organizations can do today to address moving from wherever level you are on that maturity scale, right, to continually improve, to continually get better and provide your business with the insurance that they can continue to make money while you secure the perimeter, so to speak.
mhm.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, great points that you guys have actually put forward so far as it relates to the issues surrounding achieving cybersecurity maturity. But just thinking about it, before we actually start looking at those challenges in depth, um, what's that best approach that companies or organizations can actually take as it relates to helping them to determine their level of maturity in the first place? Because if they are going to say that they want to get to a certain level of maturity, then it must be that they understand where it is that they are. And one of my main aim is to really help small entities to actually start thinking about this overall concept of cybersecurity maturity. And just talking from experience, this is not something that I hear a lot in terms of organizations, small organizations discussing in terms of their maturity on a cybersecurity scale. So is there a way that they can actually, before you want, if you're going to get to that level of maturity, then you will have to take an assessment, I believe, of where you are before we can actually move to say a level 5 or a level 4 or a level 6,
Mhm.
depending on the scale. I mean, what's your take
Mhm.
on that initial process?
You go ahead. Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I think like you were saying, you have to start with an assessment. That's the first thing. And I argue sometimes with people that actually I wouldn't even start with an assessment. I would start with understanding how the business makes money. what's important to the business, what are the motivating incentives that drive people's bonuses, right? So that, right, and then of course you got to take a look at like the business impact analysis. What are those critical areas that are going to enable the business to be successful and to take on risk in a responsible way, right? So that's where I would start. Obviously, you alluded to having a framework. Definitely having a framework in place allows you to measure where you are on that scale. So I would definitely start with a framework, and I would, yeah, I'll stop there. I don't want to go down into another rabbit hole, but I would definitely start understanding where the business, how the business makes money. Do an assessment, have a framework, determine your risk tolerance, and then actually determine your risk appetite and understand your tolerance. And from there, that your level of maturity should be guided by those factors as well as a number of other factors. So, Paul, I kind of jumped ahead of you. I don't want to.
No, no, I knew your answer was going to be solid, and it was. So, like, let's take a trip back to, early 1800s New York, and let's say you have a shoemaker business, and your business is what's now known as 42nd and 7th in Midtown Manhattan. Back in the 1800s, maybe you locked your door, maybe you had a lock on your door, maybe you didn't. You didn't have anything protecting the windows or anything, to protect the inventory that you had in your business and whatever. Fast forward to today, if you have a business on 42nd and 7th, you probably have CCTV cameras, you probably have a security guard, maybe you have metal gates that come down on the windows at night, to make sure nobody's trying to break in, and you have that. So that goes along with the maturing thing of it, maturing with the times. And that's really what I think businesses need to understand and they need to do is it's let's take away the zeros and ones. Let's take away, the binary thinking. Let's take away firewalls and EDR and SOAR and everything like that. What is the current, where does our business reside? What is the neighborhood that our business resides in? And frankly, with the boom of hybrid working, remote learning, cloud applications and things like that, your business is in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods, probably the most dangerous neighborhood in the world, which is the internet. So how does our business rely on the internet, and then how do we use it to make money, and then you can start to build your cybersecurity program around it. Chris, you're absolutely spot on, because if your cybersecurity plan and program isn't aligned to the business, then you're not going to get anywhere because there's no compelling reason to act. So, the risk assessment is important, but I think it's even a security leader, a CISO, an ISO, or whatever, ISMS, is getting all the business stakeholders in a room and talking about, okay, what does our business do? How do we rely on something that is unstable to make money? And then how do we protect against that to make it more stable from that perspective? And some people will say, well, I can't get all the stakeholders in the room. If you're working at an organization, you can't have that basic discussion, you're in the wrong organization, and you're just going to be frustrated, and it's going to lead to a lot of angst and issues on your end.
Yeah, great points. I mean, all of those would be important elements or factors to think of or to take into consideration leading up to establishing that level of maturity that you want to achieve as an organization, which brings into fact that you would have understand what these various levels of maturity are. So what's the importance of governance in all of this? Based on the fact that there's no way an IT or a cybersecurity, I mean, team can actually say, let's try to achieve um, level 5 maturity or level 4 by simply implementing controls, XYZ controls or measures for the sake of just doing. What role does governance play in helping an organization to reach that level of maturity? Is there a synergy, or should a synergy exist between um, for example, the security team or the security leader in trying to reach that level of maturity and having that overall governance and integration?
I would say yes. I would argue that governance is, we I always like to use analogy because analogy kind of it puts things into using analogies puts things into perspective. Um, you know, you drive, let's say you drive your car every day. You have a yellow line down the middle of the road. That's a control, right? So you may veer over into the next lane, but if you continue to do that and there's a police officer there, you're probably going to get pulled over and you're probably going to get a ticket, right? So the control is the line, right? And then the now you have to enforce it, right? So you can have the line, but everybody keeps driving on the other side of the road. Then it's like having controls, but you don't have a proper governance structure in place to ensure that you are staying in line in order to get to your destination. So the police or the police officer is there to ensure that the governance, that control that is in place is effective and is operating as intended, right? So that's really why you have governance. Now, if I as a CISO say I'd like to reach level 5 maturity, um, but I don't have a structure in place to get me there, and I don't have a way of monitoring how I'm going to get there, and I don't have a way of reporting on the progress, on the gap, on where I need to be, on controls, on exceptions, then I am going to have a very interesting journey, right? And that journey may actually end up being a U-turn, taking me in the other direction. So I think absolutely, I would argue that having a governance structure in place allows you to effectively carry out your remit while
Mm.
reaching the desired level of maturity.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, and I have two sub analogies from that. So governance are those controls to make sure that you're in place, and yeah, the authorities can call you out if you're not following those controls, but then also if you're not following those controls, you can cause harm to yourself and to others as well. So if I'm on that yellow line and I'm crossing over and I'm haphazardly driving and whatever with the yellow line, like I'm gonna have a head-on collision with another car. I'm gonna hurt myself. I'm gonna potentially hurt other people. I'm gonna put damage to my car. I got to get my insurance company now involved. I might lose some money out of the whole thing. Like there are intrinsic repercussions for not following the governance piece of it and articulating that message to say, especially with CMMC, because everyone's like, I got to get CMMC level 3. I got to get CMMC. It's like, yeah, that's those are controls, but also, if you don't do this and have basic governance in place, you're going to potentially cause catastrophic harm to your business. The other thing with the yellow line that popped in my head was kind of like the differences of how we have to address this. So if I'm in Des Moines, Iowa, and if you ever driven in the Midwest, like it's just straight, like that yellow line is straight. But if I go, if I'm in South America, I've been in Costa Rica before, and you're winding around, that yellow line is different. It's all over the place. It's kind of, it's curved to making sure that you stay in it. And I think that's the other important thing is especially with CMMC, you know, the rules of the road are potentially different for a 20-person organization than it is for a 2,000-person organization. It's really not the same. Yeah, there's some basic things, but how you deal with controlled unclassified information in a 20-person organization, it might be on one laptop, and all your CUIs on one laptop, where a 2,000-person organization has it in the cloud, has it on servers, has it in transit, in motion, whatever. It's understanding your environment and not making it a one size fits all exercise, but taking the rules of the road and adjusting it to the business of what you have. And you don't have an excuse anymore to not have a solid governance plan in place. It used to be, oh well, we have to have a governance. Now you have to have governance in place. Your program will go absolutely nowhere without governance leading the charge of that. It just is completely disjointed.
Exactly, exactly. I totally agree with all of, I mean, those points. The importance of having that governance structure in place. And as you're talking about governance, and I strongly believe that's one of the reasons why this cybersecurity framework has been totally revamped. I mean, recently, as you have all aware, I mean, version 2.0 having that governance to create that synergy, that glue between all of those
Hmm.
elements. I mean, being a part of that framework, and that framework in of itself can actually help to create that level of maturity, ensuring that we have a program and a structure in place that an organization can work towards to achieve is that level of resilience. So going to the actual big question of our discussion, talking about the challenges associated with achieving this level of maturity. So, achieving maturity requires continuous effort and presents a number of significant challenges for many organizations. And we are talking about things such as resource constraints, right? So, resource constraints, we are talking about budget limitations, skill workforce shortage, infrastructure limitations. Then we also have evolving threat landscape, um, legacy systems and integration, organizational culture and awareness, regulatory landscape complexity, and the list goes on. So, guys, what are your take on these elements as it relates to the challenges that are associated with achieving maturity? And then we will then look at some of those possible solutions or strategies to help with overcoming these challenges.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
again, you
think.
got you got. Oh, go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Paul.
Oh, so I was just gonna say you got to know the business. You have to know the business because the excuse of well, CMMC is too expensive, I can't do anything about it, um, is false, and it's I'll say it's lazy when you say that. You have to understand the business, the business model. You have to take into account, okay, how much of my business is tied into we'll use CMMC in a DoD perspective. How much of my business is tied into DoD? 80%. Okay, so are you willing to risk 80% of your business by not complying? That's a business choice. I can't, nor can any of us, force a business to make a change with that. But that's the real data. But if it's 3% of your business that's tied into DoD, then you have some interesting choices you can make. And I've seen people just say, listen, it's more expensive to solve this problem than to lose our defense contract and find a commercial account that can backfill the revenue loss and go from that perspective. In it's a longer discussion, and actually probably a full hour discussion. I won't go into it, but people need to understand the cost of what it takes, and if the cost to fix the problem is more than the actual thing money that you're making, then you have that's a business problem. That's not a cybersecurity problem. If you're saying it's going to cost me $100,000 to get certifiable ready, and you have a business that makes $150,000 a year, that's a business problem. It's not a cybersecurity problem. So you have to get a handle on the business first to see what you need to do in this situation, and then go from there. It's just a lot of confusion around this in DoD world, and we just have to simplify it. How much money do you make? How much money is tied into what it is that you need to comply with? Here, what's the amount of that? And is it worth it for us to financially invest? Now, as a security purist, it doesn't matter. You should be doing things in cybersecurity, regardless of whatever. But if you want to have the financial decisions and discussions around this, that's the foundation of the conversation that I see work, from that.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, with those types of, you're always gonna, as a business and as an organization, you're always gonna be faced with constraints, whether it's budgetary constraints, whether it's a skill gap constraints, or just time constraints. And that, I think, any good security leader or any leader, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to have to start prioritizing. Again, I love to use analogy, so I'll use the analogy of you know going into the emergency room. Right, there's an accident, someone was brought into the emergency room, and they're in a critical condition. Well, the first thing you do is you kind of stabilize the patient, but then you kind of triage, right? And triage, you may sometimes have to chop the hand off in order to save the heart, right? Because the heart is a critical
Mm.
faculty that you need in order to survive. The hand, yeah, you'll be constrained, but you'll still be alive, right? And I think even though it's a crude analogy, it brings the point home that sometimes when you're faced with these critical constraints in an ever evolving landscape where you're dealing with third party risk, you're dealing with user and behavior awareness challenges, the complexity of your environment, technical debt, and a plethora of other challenges and opportunities. You do sometimes have to kind of draw the line in the sand, the proverbial line in the sand, and say, okay, these are the things that I'm going to focus on. But you should also be able to rationalize those priorities, right? So, going back to that $100,000 cost to implement, this framework or this CMMC. Okay, maybe we can't do that, but maybe we could prioritize, pull things out of that model, and say, okay, we're going to work on this specific aspect of the framework first, and then in another year we'll do it, and over time we'll be able to say we're at a certain level of maturity. Again, that's why at the very beginning I said that's why it's important to have a governance structure, because you could track your progress and you could report on your progress, you can identify your gap, and by the way, you may have to course correct because the environment changes. Now all of a sudden we're going to move from cloud to something else, and we're going to move to AI. Well, when we started that journey, AI wasn't a part of the calculus. Now it is.
Hmm.
So you have to reassess your
Yeah.
journey and kind of pivot or course correct based on the environment, factors in the environment, based on business needs, and again based on that budgetary or those other constraints you have within your environment.
Yeah. And the futures discussion is so key. I remember when 800 first came out, I was meeting with a client of mine, and we were suggesting a risk assessment and data classification exercise for them. It came out to about 50K for them, and they're like, no, it's just too expensive. And I got a call 3 months later, and they're like, can you come in and meet with the board? And I'm like, all right, what did I do? Like, I went away, I didn't push anything. So I don't know what you guys want. But the comptroller comes in with a stack of paper, and he said, here are $86 million worth of RFPs that we cannot respond to because we are not compliant with 800 or we're not in line with 800 we have to fix this and fix it immediately. Now, I didn't jack up the price, but their needs became more, and so it turned into a $250,000 engage, and they wrote the check immediately, because think about it, a $250,000 price tag to solve an $86 million problem. That's a drop in the bucket. That's like, boom, we're done with that. Like, let's get it going as fast as we possibly can. And I think, futures discussions, Chris, you alluded to this, is so important. I really cringe when companies and organizations say, well, we just want to do cybersecurity and we want to be done with it. You're never done with cybersecurity. You're not done ever with it. It's assessing, it's reassessing, it's a wheel. I've seen a wheel diagram with it, where you're constantly doing it. And if you don't want to, if you want to hit nirvana and hit, where you're done, you're in the wrong industry. Like, you are absolutely in the wrong industry, because that's not the way a business operates. I don't know. I don't. To your point with AI and quantum computing, when that becomes a thing towards the end of the year, like, I don't know how you can have a business model where you're like, well, this is what we do and this is how we do it. McDonald's makes hamburgers and French fries and milkshakes. You know, that's what they did in the 1940s, and that's what they're doing today. But if AI could come into the factor and save costs and save time by using AI to cook hamburgers, make French fries, make shakes, like, you're evolving. We are in a constant state of movement as a business, and that's no different from cybersecurity. You never ever hit the end with it. You're always moving. You're always maturing.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's funny. It's funny, Paul. And I'm just gonna age myself right now, but I remember talking to one of my young mentees, and I said, if you don't change, this could be your Kodak moment. And he said, "What's
Mhm.
Kodak?" uh, because and for those who in the audience who don't know what Kodak is, Kodak, they had the lion's share of the picture industry, right? Taking photographs, and they refused to change. Right, the technology came, and they said, "Nope, we're going to stick with our cameras, and we're going to be clicking, and we're going to develop films." And they invested in a technology that was dying, and and their slogan was, your Kodak moment, right? Um, and they had their own Kodak moment in the fact that they refused. They became complacent, or they buried their head in the sand, and they chose not to evolve with the landscape. Kind of read the environment, understanding what's happening in the environment, and being able to pivot and change, right? So you stay current, or at least stay ahead, or
Mhm.
lead some of the changes. So to that
Mhm.
point, just to
Mhm.
drive that point home, Paul, I wanted to insert
Yeah.
a little
Yeah.
bit of
And
insight.
living in Rochester, New York, I live in the shadows of Kodak HQ itself. So I'll give another business lesson as to what happens when you don't evolve. Kodak had at its peak, I think, over 60,000 employees. Today we're talking about 4,500 employees. Drastic, drastic reduction in workforce because they did not evolve, and a lot of people lost a lot of money. And the other layer on top of that is that they had access to that technology. They were doing work on the Hubble telescope way back when, and that had digital film capabilities inside of it. But to your point, it's like, well, we've always done it this way. We have people that have made millions and millions of dollars that have done it this way, and they just got blown by, passed up. And that company that I told you about that went all in on fixing their governance and risk and compliance and their cybersecurity, they were a publicly traded company. Their stock went up 60% year over because they won the contracts that put them in the position to win the contracts was with building out their governance program. So there is real business impact in doing the right things from a governance perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with you guys. I mean, great points. I mean, you have actually touched on the various challenges and also, I mean, those various possible strategies and solutions that can actually help with, I mean, achieving cybersecurity maturity within our organizations, which I believe is a great note for us to actually end this intriguing conversation on. And just to make a note that there are several factors that contribute to an organization's cybersecurity maturity that organizations definitely need to take into consideration. And you guys have actually touched on some of these areas. Just to reinforce, we're talking about your people, right? So, do your employees have the necessary awareness and training to identify and respond to cyber threats? For example, we're talking about your technology. Are you using the right security tools and technologies to protect your systems and data? And then we have our processes. Do you have well defined policies and procedures for managing cyber risk? So, by assessing these factors and all that you have actually mentioned so far, and implementing appropriate improvements, organizations can work towards increasing their cybersecurity maturity and enhancing their overall security posture. So, guys, if there are no final words, I mean, that's it from us here on Cyber JA. And we look forward to seeing you in our next monthly Cyber GRC conversation.
Take care,
Thank you.
everybody.
Take care,
Bye.
guys.
Cheers.
Enjoy.